The silver spoon hit the floor first. The sound was sharp, final, like a verdict being read. Across the dinner table, Ethan stared at his mother with eyes colder than she had ever seen. "Mom," he said flatly, "you need to pack your things. Lila's parents are moving in tomorrow." The roast chicken sat untouched. Steam rose, but the warmth in the room had vanished. Margaret Blake blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. "What did you say?" Ethan didn't hesitate. "The house is too big for you. Lila's parents sold theirs, and we agreed it makes sense for them to stay here." From the far end of the table, Lila smiled faintly. "It's really for the best. You'll be more comfortable somewhere smaller. Maybe near your friends?" Her tone was smooth, practiced. Margaret set her fork down carefully, though her hand trembled. The air felt heavy, thick with betrayal. "This house was built by your father and me," she said quietly. "Every wall, every nail, Ethan." He crossed his arms. "It's just a house, Mom. You can't live here forever." She stared at him, her chest tightening. "You can't be serious. I am. You'll have a week to move your things. A week." The words echoed like a sentence. Lila sipped her wine. "Think of it as a new beginning. Change is good for the soul." Margaret forced a breath, fighting the tremor in her voice. "Where exactly do you expect me to go?" Ethan shrugged. "You have savings. You'll figure it out." "My savings," she repeated softly. "You mean the money I used to pay your bills when you lost your job?" His jaw stiffened. "That's not the point." "Then what is?" she asked. "That I'm a burden now." Lila's voice cut through like glass. "We're trying to do what's best for everyone." "Everyone but me," Margaret said. The silence that followed was colder than the December wind outside. She looked at her son, her only child, and felt something inside her crack. She had worked herself to exhaustion after his father died, kept food on the table, paid his tuition, gave him everything she could. Now he stood with his wife, dismissing her like a tenant overstaying her welcome. Lila leaned closer to Ethan, whispering something that made him nod. Then, with a soft smile, she said, "It's settled. Let's not make this harder than it needs to be." That name, Margaret, not Mom, hung in the air like an insult. She rose slowly, steadying herself on the chair. "Enjoy your dinner." Her footsteps echoed through the hall as she climbed the stairs. Each framed photo on the wall seemed to watch her go. Ethan's graduation, their family Christmases, her late husband smiling beside her. When she reached her room, the laughter downstairs began again, carefree, victorious. She closed the door quietly and leaned against it. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. The home she built, the memories she cherished, taken from her in a single conversation. Yet beneath the pain, something colder stirred. They thought she was weak. They thought she had nowhere to go. But they were wrong. Sitting on the edge of her bed, Margaret's eyes landed on a wooden box inside the closet. She opened it slowly. Inside were the original papers to the Blake estate, tucked under another name, hers. Years ago, when her husband was still alive, his lawyer, Clara, had advised her to secure everything just in case. "People change when money speaks," her husband had said, handing her the documents. She had forgotten those words until now. The laughter from below drifted up the stairs, cruel and careless. Margaret straightened, her hands steady again. Tomorrow she would leave this house without a word. She would let them believe they had won. And then, piece by piece, she would take it back. Not with shouting or tears, but with quiet, deliberate precision. They wanted her gone. She would give them that. But soon they would learn what it meant to challenge a woman who had already survived everything: grief, loneliness, betrayal. She glanced once more at the mirror. The woman staring back was older, yes, but her eyes were fierce again. A faint smile curved her lips. "You think you've taken everything," she whispered, "but you've only reminded me who I am." Downstairs, the silver spoon still lay on the floor, glinting in the dim light, a silent witness to the moment a mother lost her son and found her strength again. Rain hammered the windshield in steady, angry bursts. The highway shimmered under the streetlights, slick as glass. Margaret Blake's hands clenched the steering wheel, knuckles white, jaw tight. Her son's words still rang in her ears, cold, detached, final. "You'll figure something out." She had left without another word. No goodbye, no backward glance. Just one suitcase, a few family photos, and her late husband's watch around her wrist. Everything else, her home, her memories, her pride, was now in the hands of a woman who smiled while stealing it. The sign for a roadside motel flickered ahead. Sea Breeze Inn. There was no sea, no breeze, just the smell of wet pavement and diesel fumes. Margaret parked under a buzzing lamp, turned off the engine, and sat in silence. The sound of the rain filled the car, drowning out her thoughts. When she finally stepped outside, the cold bit through her coat. Inside, the lobby was small, dim, and smelled faintly of bleach. A young clerk looked up from his phone. "Need a room?" "Yes," she said quietly. $45? Room 7. The key landed on the counter with a dull thud. Her room was as tired as she was. Yellowed wallpaper, one creaking chair, a single light bulb that flickered in protest. She set her suitcase down and sat on the edge of the bed. The springs groaned beneath her weight. For a long moment, she just stared at the wall, blank and motionless. Then the first tear slipped down her cheek. Her son, her only child, had thrown her out of her own home. She tried to picture his face at 5 years old, holding a wooden airplane, eyes wide with pride. Now those same eyes looked at her like she was an obstacle. The hurt was so sharp it made her chest ache. She stood, pacing the narrow room. The thin carpet scratched beneath her feet. Every memory she'd built seemed to crumble with each step. The Christmas mornings, the smell of her husband's coffee, the laughter echoing through the hallways, all gone, replaced by silence and rain. She stopped at the window. Outside, neon light blinked against the puddles. A man in a hood crossed the parking lot, his reflection splitting and reforming in the water. Margaret's own reflection stared back at her, pale and lined, but not weak. Beneath the pain, something older and harder was stirring. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. A message from Lila. "Hope you made it somewhere safe. This is what's best for everyone." Margaret read it twice, then deleted it. The urge to reply, to unleash the fury burning in her chest was strong, but she didn't. Instead, she whispered, "You have no idea who you're dealing with." She sat at the small table, pulled out her wallet, and found an old business card tucked behind her driver's license. Clara Jennings, attorney at law, her husband's lawyer, her friend. The woman who, years ago, had quietly suggested she keep certain assets in her own name. "You never know what people will do for money," Clara had said. "Protect yourself, Margaret." At the time, she'd brushed it off, believing family meant safety. Tonight, those words felt prophetic. Margaret knelt beside her suitcase and unzipped the front pocket. Inside, wrapped in an old scarf, was a small wooden box. Her hands trembled as she lifted the lid. There, folded neatly inside, were the original deeds to the Blake estate, signed, sealed, and legally hers. Her husband had insisted on it before he died. The realization hit her like thunder. They thought they had taken everything, but the truth was simple. They owned nothing. The house, the land, even the furniture, all still belonged to her. Margaret closed the box and sat back on the bed. Her breathing slowed, steady now, controlled. She imagined Ethan's face when he found out. The panic, the disbelief, the shame. For a moment, she almost felt sorry for him. Almost. The clock on the nightstand read 1 in the morning. She slipped off her shoes and lay down, staring at the ceiling. The air smelled faintly of rain and dust. Sleep refused to come. She thought of Clara, of calling her at sunrise, of setting everything in motion. Outside, the storm softened to a drizzle. The world seemed to exhale. Margaret turned on her side and whispered into the darkness, "You wanted me gone. Fine. But you'll regret ever underestimating me." Her eyes closed, but her mind didn't rest. Behind the quiet, plans began to take shape. Slow, deliberate, unstoppable. By morning, she would no longer be the woman who left her house in tears. She would be the woman who came back for it. Morning light filtered through the thin motel curtains, soft and pale. Margaret Blake woke with a start, her back aching from a night of restless sleep. For one moment, she didn't remember. Then the memory struck. Ethan's cold voice, Lila's smirk, the humiliation. Her son had thrown her out of her own home. She sat up, rubbed her eyes, and stared at the cracked mirror above the sink. The woman staring back looked tired, older, but something fierce glimmered beneath the exhaustion. Determination. By 8 o'clock, she had checked out. The young clerk handed her the receipt with a polite smile. She nodded, too drained to speak. Her only plan was to find Clara Jennings, her husband's lawyer and her closest friend. Clara had always been the voice of reason when life turned cruel. Savannah glowed under the morning sun. Rainwater sparkled in the gutters as Margaret drove through the quiet streets. She passed the park where she once watched Ethan play, the cafe where she and her husband shared Sunday breakfasts. The city looked unchanged, but everything inside her was different. Clara's office sat between a bookstore and a florist, ivy climbing its red brick walls. Margaret hesitated before stepping inside. The receptionist looked up from her desk. "Good morning. Do you have an appointment?" "Please tell Ms. Jennings that Margaret Blake is here," she said softly. Recognition flickered in the woman's eyes. Of course. One moment. A door opened. Clara appeared, tall, elegant, her silver hair neatly pinned. "Margaret," she said gently, "I was afraid I'd see you again like this." Margaret tried to smile. "You always did have a way of predicting storms." They entered the office. The air smelled of old books and paper. Sunlight spread across a polished oak desk stacked with files. "Tell me everything," Clara said. Margaret did. Every word, every wound. The dinner, the command, the moment her son's voice turned cold. Clara listened in silence, her expression steady but her eyes burning. When Margaret finished, the room fell still. Clara leaned forward. "They told you to leave your own house?" "They said it made more sense for her parents to live there," Margaret replied bitterly, "as if I were an inconvenience." Clara opened a drawer and pulled out a thin folder. "Do you remember when your husband set up the property trust years ago? I thought it was just paperwork." "It wasn't," Clara said. "He placed everything, the house, the land, the savings, under your name. You're still the legal owner. Ethan has no rights to that property." Margaret froze. "It's still mine? Every inch of it. Your husband wanted to protect you. He even told me, if the boy ever forgets where he came from, remind him who built the ground he stands on." Margaret exhaled, shaky but relieved. "He always saw further than I did." Clara smiled faintly. "He trusted your strength. Now it's time you use it." "I don't want revenge," Margaret said quietly. "I just want what's right." "Then we'll do it quietly," Clara replied. "I'll send a formal notice. No threats, no scenes, only facts. Let them think they've won. Margaret nodded slowly. Let them enjoy their illusion. Exactly, Clara said. Power is calm. Let them underestimate you. For the first time since that awful night, Margaret felt her heart steady. They spent an hour signing documents and reviewing steps. When they finished, Clara clasped her hand. You're stronger than you think, Margaret. You always were. Outside, the air was cool and bright. Margaret stood on the sidewalk, folder in hand, watching the morning unfold. People hurried by, unaware that a quiet war had just begun. Her phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. Hope you're safe. We'll pack your things later. She read it once, then deleted it without a word. Sliding into her car, she caught her reflection in the rearview mirror. The lines on her face were deeper, but her eyes burned steady. You'll see soon enough, she murmured. The engine started with a low hum. As she pulled onto the sunlit street, the corners of her mouth lifted. They believed they'd erased her, but they had only helped her remember who she was. The courthouse clock struck 10 as Margaret stepped out of her car, the folder of legal documents pressed firmly to her chest. The morning sun was bright but cold, lighting Savannah's cobblestone streets with a chill that suited her mood. Today wasn't about mourning what she had lost. It was about reclaiming what was hers. Inside, Claire's office smelled faintly of old paper and fresh coffee. The older woman looked up from behind her desk, a knowing smile softening her sharp features. You came early, she said. I couldn't stay still, Margaret replied. I spent half the night staring at those papers. The truth is, I don't know whether I'm more angry or ashamed for letting it all happen. Clara gestured toward the chair across from her. Don't confuse kindness with weakness. You gave them everything. They mistook that for permission. Margaret sat, her fingers tightening around the folder. Then it's time to take that permission back. Exactly. Clara slid a printed letter across the desk. I prepared a formal notice of ownership. Calm, professional, undeniable. It informs Ethan and Lila that the property, the land, and all assets tied to the Blake estate remain under your name as sole trustee. Margaret scanned the document. Her name appeared bold and certain at the top. The sight steadied her heartbeat. This is all it takes? This, and patience, Clara said. Power doesn't always need noise. Sometimes it just needs proof. Margaret smiled faintly and signed her name. Send it. Clara nodded. By sunset, they'll know who really owns that house. As Margaret stepped outside, the air felt lighter. She walked to her car with slow, deliberate steps, the morning sun reflecting off the windshield. Her phone buzzed, a text from Ethan. Mom, we need to talk. Call me. She locked the screen without replying. Her car seemed to move on instinct, taking her down familiar streets until she turned onto Willow Lane. Her home, her husband's legacy, stood there, shining under the sun, unchanged and yet unrecognizable. Cars filled the driveway. Voices drifted from the porch. Laughter spilled from the open windows. She parked at the curb and sat motionless, watching. Through the glass, she saw Lila rearranging furniture, her parents unpacking boxes, her son standing among them like a stranger. His sleeves were rolled up, his father's watch glinting on his wrist. The sight twisted her stomach. They looked settled, comfortable, certain. She almost pitied them. A horn startled her. Mr. Porter, her old neighbor, leaned from his car window. Margaret? That you? She smiled faintly. It's me, Bill. Well, I'll be damned. Thought you moved away. Not exactly, she said. He frowned. What happened? Margaret hesitated. Family business, the kind that changes everything. He studied her face. If you need help, you know where I am. That house doesn't feel right without you. Her lips curved into a small, knowing smile. It won't be theirs for long. By afternoon, Clara called. The letter's been delivered, she said. They'll open it today. Margaret stood at the riverfront, the wind lifting her hair. Let them enjoy their illusion, she said. It's the last piece they'll have. Clara chuckled. You sound like your husband when he negotiated deals. Calm but dangerous. I learned from the best. As the day faded, Margaret drove back to her small apartment, a quiet place overlooking the bay. She brewed tea, her movements slow and deliberate. The phone rang again, Ethan's name flashing on the screen. She watched it vibrate on the counter until it went silent. Then came another text. Mom, please call me. It's important. She set the phone aside, lifted her cup, and looked out at the sea. The water caught the last light of the sun, turning gold before sinking into gray. Somewhere across town, her son was realizing that his confidence had been built on her foundation. Without her name, he had nothing. There was no triumph in her heart, only quiet justice. She thought of her husband's words the night he signed those papers. Protect what we built, not for wealth, but for meaning. She whispered, I kept my promise. A low rumble of thunder echoed over the horizon. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain. Margaret smiled faintly. The storm was coming, but she didn't fear it. She was the one who called it. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the Blake house, painting soft gold across the floorboards. Inside, laughter filled the air, bright, hollow, the sound of people celebrating something that was never truly theirs. Lila stood in the center of the living room, holding her phone at the perfect angle. Once the contractors finish, it'll be flawless, she said. We'll make this place ours. Her mother smiled, sipping wine. Hard to believe your husband's mother just walked away from a house like this. Some people don't know how to appreciate blessings. Ethan entered from the hallway, his expression tense. She didn't walk away, he muttered. She was quiet, that's all. Lila glanced up, her tone sharp but sweet. Ethan, she's fine. She's probably at a friend's house knitting scarves. Stop making it sound tragic. He frowned. She didn't even argue. Not one word. Doesn't that bother you? Lila laughed lightly. Why should it? She's old. Maybe she finally realized it's time to let go. Her words stung, though she didn't notice. The room, with its new furniture and polished silver, felt foreign. The smell of fresh paint covered the scent of the roses his mother used to grow by the porch. For a moment, Ethan wanted to open a window to let the old house breathe again, but he stayed silent. Across the city, Margaret sat at her small kitchen table, the copy of Clara's legal notice resting beside her teacup. The official tone of the words felt oddly comforting. All property rights remain under the authority of Margaret Blake. It was clean, factual, final. She didn't need to be there to see the reaction. She could already picture it, their shock, their confusion, their fear. Her phone buzzed. A message from Mr. Porter, her old neighbor. Saw some activity at your place again. Hope you're doing all right. Margaret smiled faintly. Doing better than ever, she typed back. Justice has good timing. Back at the house, dinner had turned tense. Lila's mother cleared the table, humming softly, when she noticed an unopened envelope resting beside the mail pile. What's this? She asked. Ethan shrugged. Probably another bill. She opened it casually and froze. Ethan, you should read this. He frowned, unfolding the letter. As his eyes scanned the lines, color drained from his face. This can't be right. Lila looked up. What? It says the property is still owned by my mother, that she never transferred the deed. Lila's laugh sounded forced. That's impossible. You told me she gave you the house. She didn't, he said quietly. I assumed. You assumed wrong, she snapped. She grabbed the paper, scanning it with trembling hands. No, this must be a mistake. But it wasn't. The words were clear, printed in black and white, sealed with Clara's firm signature. Lila's father stood, his voice low. "If this is real, you could lose everything." Ethan stared down at the letter, his jaw tight. "We already did." Upstairs, he walked into what had once been his mother's room. The smell of lavender still lingered faintly in the air. He sat on the edge of the bed, head in his hands. He remembered her quiet smile that night at dinner, the way she had simply said, "Enjoy your meal." Now he understood it hadn't been surrender. It had been warning. Downstairs, panic spread through the family. Lila's mother whispered, "We need a lawyer." Lila ignored her, pacing back and forth, clutching the letter. "She won't take this house from us. She can't." But the tremor in her voice betrayed her. For the first time, she sounded uncertain. Across town, Margaret watched the sun set through her window. She didn't need anger to feel powerful. Calm suited her better. "You can't build a life on deceit," she murmured. "Sooner or later, the truth evicts you." Thunder rolled faintly in the distance, promising another storm. She sipped her tea, unbothered. The pieces were moving exactly as she'd planned. By nightfall, the once busy house had fallen quiet. The unopened wine glasses still glimmered under the chandelier, and the legal notice sat in the center of the table, a silent verdict no one could ignore. Upstairs, Ethan lay awake, the paper still in his hand. Lila slept fitfully beside him, whispering angry dreams. And somewhere between regret and realization, he finally understood his mother hadn't lost her home. She had simply let them borrow it, long enough to watch them destroy themselves. Morning broke soft and gray over Savannah. In her small apartment, Margaret stirred her coffee slowly, the spoon clinking against the cup in a steady rhythm. She hadn't slept, but she didn't feel weak. The air felt lighter, clearer. For the first time since Ethan's betrayal, her heart wasn't breaking. It was sharpening. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Ethan. "Mom, please call me. We need to talk." She turned it face down on the counter. He could wait. The boy who once demanded her attention could now learn patience. By mid-morning, she was in Clara's office. The city hummed outside, sunlight spilling across the desk between them. Clara handed her a cup of coffee. "You look different," she said. "Stronger." "I am," Margaret said. "They finally know." Clara smiled. "I imagine the letter landed like a thunderclap." "Ethan's already texted 3 times," she replied evenly. "He'll call next. But I'm not ready to listen." "Good," Clara said. "Let him feel the silence. It's more powerful than shouting." Across town, silence was exactly what filled the Blake house. The laughter from yesterday was gone. Lila sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone with trembling hands. "This has to be a mistake," she muttered. "Your mother can't still own the property." Ethan stood by the window, dark circles under his eyes. "It's not a mistake. I should have known she'd protect herself. My father would have insisted." Lila's tone hardened. "Then make her sign it over." He shook his head. "She won't. Not after what we did." "She's an old woman," Lila snapped. "She can't fight us." Ethan turned to her, eyes cold. "You don't know her." Back in the office, Clara reviewed the next steps. They might contest it, but it'll fail. The trust is solid. If they keep pushing, we'll involve the court. Margaret nodded, calm but resolute. "I don't want to fight, Clara. I just want them to understand that betrayal has consequences." "That's exactly what this does," Clara said, "legally and emotionally." Margaret almost smiled. "It feels strange. Power through paperwork." "It's the cleanest kind," Clara said. As they finished signing the follow-up documents, Margaret's phone rang again. Ethan. She watched the screen light up, then fade as the call went to voicemail. A few seconds later, his voice came through the speaker, low and strained. "Mom, you can't do this. You're ruining everything. Please, call me back." Clara raised an eyebrow. "Do you want to save that?" "Let him keep talking," Margaret said. "Words are easier than responsibility." That afternoon, she walked along the riverfront. The wind tugged at her hair, carrying the faint scent of salt. For years, she'd built her identity around caring for others. Now, standing beneath the open sky, she realized she was learning to care for herself. A familiar voice broke her thoughts. "Mrs. Blake?" She turned to see Mr. Porter, her old neighbor, carrying a paper bag. "Bill," she said warmly. He smiled. "Heard some talk around Willow Lane. People say your son's in trouble." Margaret's expression softened. "Maybe he's learning what trouble feels like?" He nodded. "You doing all right?" "I'm finally doing right by myself." "That's something," he said. "That house never felt right without you." "It won't belong to them much longer," she said quietly. As the sun dipped low, Margaret returned home. The sky glowed amber as she made tea, her movement steady, deliberate. The phone rang again, Ethan. She let it ring until it stopped. Moments later, another text appeared. "Please, we can fix this." She didn't reply. She didn't need to. Across the city, they were already unraveling. Inside the once busy Blake house, tension simmered. Lila paced the hallway, muttering under her breath. Her parents whispered in corners, anxious about losing the life they'd so quickly claimed. Ethan sat alone in the living room, the legal letter spread before him. His hands shook slightly as he traced his mother's signature. Margaret Blake, owner and trustee. Lila stormed in. "You're just going to sit there." He didn't look up. "She built this place. I only borrowed it." "She's manipulating you," Lila shouted. He met her gaze, calm now. "No, she's teaching me." Thunder rumbled outside, low and steady. Across town, Margaret stood by her window, the first drops of rain tapping the glass. She felt no fear. The storm didn't sound like chaos anymore. It sounded like cleansing. She whispered, "You thought you could erase me, but I'm still here." Lightning flashed, reflecting her face in the window. Strong, unbroken. The woman they tried to discard had become the force that would undo them all. Thunder rolled over Savannah as dawn broke, rain streaking down the windows of the Blake house. Inside, silence hung thick. The laughter that once filled the halls was gone, replaced by fear and denial. Lila sat on the couch, her phone glowing in her trembling hand. "Every lawyer says the same thing," she whispered. "Your mother owns everything." Ethan stood by the fireplace, staring at a framed photo of his parents. His father's hand rested on his mother's shoulder, both smiling proudly. He couldn't look at it without feeling small. "She always said the house would stay in the family," he murmured. "It will," Lila snapped. "We're the family now." He turned slowly. "We took it from her." "She left," Lila shot back. "No one forced her." Ethan's voice hardened. "I did." Rain pounded harder against the glass, the sound filling the silence. Upstairs, Lila's parents whispered as they packed their things, afraid of losing everything they had gained too easily. Across town, Margaret sat at her small kitchen table, calm amid the storm. Clara's message was clear. The eviction notice had been served. 72 hours. No appeals. Margaret folded the paper neatly and set it beside her teacup. Justice didn't roar. It arrived quietly. Her phone buzzed again. "Ethan, Mom, please, call me. We can fix this." She turned it face down and stared out at the rain. "You can't fix what you never valued," she whispered. At the Blake house, Lila's mother confronted Ethan near the staircase. "You need to stop this," she hissed. "We've given up everything for this move." Ethan shook his head. "You can't lose what was never yours." "She's punishing you," the woman spat. He looked at her calmly. "No, She's reminding me." Lila entered, anger burning in her voice. "Reminding you? She's ruining us." Ethan met her eyes. "No, Lila. She's teaching me what I forgot. Respect." Back in her apartment, Margaret received another call from Clara. "They've been served," Clara said. "Tomorrow morning, the sheriff will confirm the transfer. After that, the house is legally yours again." Margaret smiled faintly. "It was always mine. They just forgot who built it." "You're not going to the property?" Clara asked. "No," Margaret said softly. "Let the law speak for me." The rain eased by afternoon. On Willow Lane, the once proud house looked smaller under the gray sky. Ethan stood by the window, watching the water drip from the porch roof. Lila joined him, arms crossed. "If you cared about us, you'd make her stop," she said. "She gave me everything," he answered quietly. "I gave her nothing but grief." Lila scoffed. "You're pathetic. She's manipulating you." He turned toward her, voice low. "She's the only one who never did." That night, thunder rolled again. Lila sat at the dining table, the eviction notice spread before her, the words blurring through her tears. Her parents whispered nearby, arguing over what to do next. The air was thick with dread. Upstairs, Ethan sat on the edge of the bed that once belonged to his mother. The faint scent of lavender still lingered on the curtains. He remembered the storms from his childhood when she'd hold him close and whisper, "Don't be afraid of thunder. It's only the sky telling the truth." Now, he understood. The storm wasn't punishment. It was revelation. Across the city, Margaret stood by her window, watching the rain fade to drizzle. She didn't hate her son. She pitied him. Sometimes, pain was the only way to teach love. Her phone buzzed once more. Another message. "I'm sorry." She let the screen go dark. The words meant nothing yet. By evening, the Blake house was quiet. The chandelier lights glowed dimly over the dining table where the notice lay, a silent verdict no one dared to touch. Lila's parents packed in silence. Lila sat frozen, staring into space. Ethan came downstairs carrying a suitcase. "Where are you going?" she demanded. "To see my mother." "You're not serious." "I am. If you walk out that door, don't come back." He paused, then met her eyes. "That's the plan." He stepped outside into the damp air. The storm had passed, leaving puddles that reflected the faint glow of streetlights. For the first time in months, he felt lighter. Across town, Margaret sat on her couch, listening to the soft patter of rain. The city was quiet now, washed clean. She whispered to the night, "You wanted me gone, but I'm still here." Outside, lightning flashed once more, bright, certain, final, signaling the end of one life and the beginning of another. The morning after the storm dawned clear and cold. Savannah's streets glistened under the early light, washed clean by rain. In her small apartment, Margaret poured herself a cup of coffee and watched the sky shift from gray to gold. Today, it would end. Her phone sat silent on the counter. Ethan hadn't called since last night. She knew he would come. Suns always came when the noise of pride finally turned into the silence of regret. She slipped the eviction notice into her purse and exhaled slowly. The war was almost over. At 8 o'clock, Clara's voice came through the phone. The sheriff confirmed it. "The papers are final. They have 72 hours to vacate." "Thank you," Margaret said quietly. "You're not planning to go there, are you?" Clara asked. "No," she replied. "Let them face the silence they created." Across town, the Blake house stood still under a pale sun. Inside, the air was heavy with denial. Lila sat at the dining table, the eviction notice spread before her. Her parents whispered by the window, packing boxes, avoiding her eyes. Ethan stood near the staircase, his shoulders bowed. "We need to start packing," he said. Lila looked up sharply. "You can't be serious." "I am," he said. "The house isn't ours." "She's your mother," she snapped. "She wouldn't really do this." He gave a humorless laugh. "You don't know her. She warned me years ago. Don't confuse my kindness with weakness." Lila's voice cracked. "You're just gonna let her win?" "She's not winning," he said quietly. "She's taking back what's hers." Lila turned away, trembling. Her father muttered something about lawyers, but even he sounded uncertain. The illusion of security was gone. Across the city, Margaret sat in the cemetery beside her husband's grave. The grass was damp beneath her shoes, the marble stone cool beneath her fingertips. "You were right," she whispered. "They had to learn the hard way." The wind stirred, brushing her hair across her face. "I kept your promise," she added softly. "The home stays ours." When she returned to her apartment, she found Ethan's car parked outside. He was waiting by the steps, rain jacket slung over one arm, looking smaller than she remembered. "Mom," he said quietly. She didn't move. "You read the papers." He nodded. "I deserve this." She studied his face. "What do you want from me, Ethan?" "Not forgiveness," he said. "Just a chance to say I was wrong." She crossed her arms. "You threw me out of the home I built. Words don't rebuild walls." "I know," he whispered. "I thought I was protecting Lila, proving I could take care of her. Instead, I forgot who took care of me." Her voice softened, though her eyes stayed firm. "You can't rewrite what's done, but you can decide who you'll be next." He swallowed hard. "I don't know where to start." "Start by leaving that house," she said. "It's poisoned. Build something honest from nothing. It's the only way you'll remember the value of what you lost." Ethan's eyes shone. "You really think I can?" "I know you can," she said, "but only if you stop blaming everyone else." He nodded slowly, then said, "Can I help you move back?" Margaret hesitated. "Not yet. I'll return when the air is clean again." A single tear rolled down his cheek. "I'm sorry, Mom." She took a breath. Sorry doesn't fix everything, but it's a beginning. He turned toward his car, pausing once to look back. "Thank you for not giving up on me." "I almost did," she said softly. "Almost." When he was gone, she stood on the porch for a long time, listening to the fading hum of his engine. The ache in her chest wasn't anger anymore. It was release. By evening, the Blake house stood quiet and empty. The sheriff's seal hung on the door. The echo of voices that once mocked her had vanished, replaced by silence and consequence. In her apartment, Margaret lit a single candle. The flame flickered against the window, small but steady. She wrapped her hands around her mug and whispered, "It's finished." The city outside was calm again. For the first time in years, she felt peace. Not victory, not revenge, just the quiet satisfaction of a woman who had reclaimed her life, her home, and herself. And as the last light of day slipped beyond the horizon, Margaret Blake smiled, not because she had won, but because she had survived. The next morning, Margaret's phone buzzed nonstop. She ignored it until Clara called. "Don't panic," Clara said, "but Lila's gone public." Margaret's hand froze on her coffee mug. "Public?" "She posted a picture," Clara continued, "her crying in front of the house. Caption says you kicked her out, claims she's pregnant and homeless." Margaret's breath caught. "Pregnant?" "It's a lie," Clara said, "but people believe what they want to believe." Margaret opened her laptop. The headline flashed like a wound. "Cruel mother-in-law evicts young couple." Lila's face stared back at her. Tears, trembling hands, a perfect performance. Thousands of comments filled the page. "Heartless old woman. She deserves to rot. No wonder her son left her." The words blurred. "She's turning strangers into an army," Margaret whispered. "Don't engage," Clara warned. "She wants your anger. Stay calm." But as the comments multiplied, Margaret's composure cracked. Someone had shared her address. A stranger wrote, "We should show her what eviction feels like." She closed the laptop, her hands trembling. Across town, Lila sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through the same post, smiling faintly at the chaos she'd unleashed. Her mother stood behind her. "Are you sure about this, dear?" "Completely," Lila said. "If people hate her, she'll have no choice but to back down." Ethan appeared in the doorway. "What did you do?" "She forced my hand," Lila said. "You think she's the only one allowed to play dirty?" He stepped closer. "You lied, Lila. About being pregnant?" Her chin lifted. "It's called strategy." Ethan's voice broke. "It's called cruelty. You think anyone cares about the difference?" She snapped. "They believe me. That's what matters." But her confidence faltered when Ethan stormed out. "You're destroying her," he said. "That's the point," she whispered. By afternoon, Clara arrived at Margaret's apartment, calm as always. She made a fatal mistake, Clara said, setting her briefcase down. In her post, Lila admits she planned to sell the house to start a new life. That's proof of intent to commit fraud. Margaret looked up, shocked. "So her lie helps us?" "It does," Clara said. "You just have to stay silent. Let the evidence speak." Margaret nodded slowly. She wanted me humiliated. Instead, she confessed in front of the world. Still, the hate messages didn't stop. Margaret brewed tea and sat by the window as thunder rumbled far away. She thought of her husband's favorite saying, "When people show you who they are, believe them." Now she did. Across town, Lila's mother frowned at her daughter's phone. "Maybe you should delete the post," she said. "This could get worse." "No," Lila snapped. "She deserves every bit of this." Her defiance faded when Ethan returned, drenched from the rain. "They're pressing charges," he said. "Fraud, misrepresentation. Clara's handling it." Lila froze. "She's bluffing." "She's not," he said quietly. "You gave her proof." Her voice rose. "You're taking her side again?" Ethan stared at her. "I'm taking the truth side. Something you wouldn't recognize if it hit you." He turned and walked out. The door slammed, leaving Lila shaking in the echo. Later that night, Clara texted Margaret. "We move tomorrow. Everything's in place." Margaret smiled faintly, setting down her cup. "Justice," she whispered, "always finds its way home." When dawn came again, the story online shifted. News outlets confirmed Lila's pregnancy claim was false. Her post vanished, deleted without apology. But the screenshots remained, proof of her lies. By noon, the backlash turned. Commenters who once called Margaret a monster now called Lila a fraud. The internet moved fast, but the damage to Lila's name would linger. That afternoon, a knock came at Margaret's door. When she opened it, Ethan stood there soaked from the rain. His voice was hoarse. "She's gone. Her parents, too." They packed up and left. Margaret studied him silently, then stepped aside. "Come in." He sat at the table, staring at his hands. "I ruined everything." "No," she said softly. "You let someone else ruin it for you." "I should have stopped her," he whispered. "You couldn't," she said. "You were blind, not cruel." He looked up, eyes rimmed red. "Is there any way back?" "Maybe," she said, "if you start with honesty." Outside, the rain eased. The city glowed clean and new under the pale sun. Margaret watched the light touch the window pane and thought, not of revenge, but of peace. Justice didn't always need to shout. Sometimes it simply waited for the truth to speak, and it always did. The following morning, the sky over Savannah glowed soft and blue. Margaret woke early, not from worry this time, but from habit. For the first time in months, her apartment felt peaceful. The chaos had quieted. Truth had done its work. She brewed a cup of coffee, then opened the blinds to watch sunlight spill across the river. The city looked new, washed clean by days of rain and revelation. Her phone buzzed, a message from Clara. Court papers filed. It's official. They won't challenge it. Margaret smiled faintly. Good, she murmured. Let peace do the rest. Across town, the Blake house sat heavy under the morning light. Boxes cluttered the hallways, furniture half covered by sheets. Ethan moved quietly from room to room, his expression hollow. Every sound seemed to echo. Lila's perfume still hung faintly in the air, a ghost of everything false. Mr. Porter watched from his porch as Ethan loaded the car. "Morning, son," he called. "Moving day." Ethan nodded. "You could say that." "She left?" "Yesterday," he said softly. "Took everything but her pride." Mr. Porter shook his head. "Pride's the hardest thing to carry when you've lost everything else." Ethan managed a sad smile. "Yeah, I'm learning that." Inside, the sheriff's notice still hung on the door. The words were blunt. "Vacate immediately." He took one last look at the living room, the worn couch, the family photos his mother once arranged, the faint mark on the wall where his father's watch had hung. Every inch of it felt like memory, not ownership. Meanwhile, Margaret met Clara at the courthouse to finalize the paperwork. The process was simple, almost anticlimactic. A few signatures, a few stamps, and the house was hers again, officially, legally, undeniably. Clara closed the file. "That's it. You're back where you belong." Margaret exhaled slowly. "Funny. I don't even feel triumphant. Just free." "That's how justice feels," Clara said. "It doesn't celebrate. It exhales." Later that afternoon, Margaret drove back to Willow Lane for the first time since that awful night. The neighborhood was quiet, only the soft sound of wind rustling through trees. Her car slowed as the house came into view, familiar, proud, waiting. Ethan stood in the driveway, suitcase beside him. When he saw her, he straightened, guilt flickering in his eyes. "Mom," he said. She parked and stepped out slowly. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them was thick, but not bitter, just full of things too heavy for words. "You're leaving?" she asked finally. He nodded. "I didn't think you'd want to see me." "I didn't," she said honestly, "but I'm glad I did." He swallowed hard. "The house is yours again. I left the keys inside." She looked past him toward the porch. "I never needed the keys, Ethan. It was always mine." "I know," he whispered. "I see that now." For a long moment, they just stood there. Then he said quietly, "I don't expect forgiveness." "You'll get it anyway," she replied, "but not all at once." He nodded, his voice trembling. "I'm sorry." "I know," she said softly. "But I hope one day you'll understand what that word really costs." He blinked back tears. "Where will you go now?" "Home," she said simply. "And you?" "I don't know yet. Maybe somewhere I can start over." "That's a good place to begin," she said. He turned to leave, then stopped. "Mom?" "Yes?" He hesitated. "Thank you for not letting me destroy you." She smiled faintly. "You didn't have that kind of power." When he drove away, Margaret stood for a while, the wind lifting her hair. The house loomed before her, not as a monument to pain, but as proof of survival. She walked up the steps slowly and opened the door. Inside, the air smelled faintly of dust and rain. Her footsteps echoed through the empty rooms. The silence was soft, welcoming, forgiving. She touched the wall where her husband's photo once hung and whispered, "We're home." That evening, she sat in the living room surrounded by sunlight and quiet. The world outside moved on, but for Margaret, time paused. She thought of everything that had led her here, the betrayal, the humiliation, the storm, and felt only gratitude. Justice hadn't restored what she lost. It had revealed what she still had: strength, dignity, peace. As night fell, she lit a single lamp and whispered to the empty house, "It's over." And for the first time in years, it truly was. Evening settled gently over Savannah, the kind that smelled of rain and renewal. Margaret stood in her kitchen, tracing the worn grain of the counter her husband had built years ago. The house was hers again, yet victory felt strange, quiet and heavy, not sweet. Her phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. "I made it to Charleston. Found a small place near the docks. I'll call soon." She read it twice, then set the phone aside. Part of her wanted to reply, but silence felt right. Words would mean more later, after time had done its work. The clock struck 7. She brewed tea, letting the steam calm her nerves. The house creaked softly, as if adjusting to her presence again. The walls still smelled faintly of paint and strangers, but beneath it lingered the scent of home, familiar, patient, forgiving. When she carried her tea to the living room, she noticed how bare everything looked. She hadn't rehung any photos yet. She wasn't sure which memories belonged back on the walls. Through the window, the neighborhood glowed under the soft amber of streetlights. Across the street, Mr. Porter was trimming his hedges. When he saw her, he waved. She smiled and waved back. Minutes later, he crossed the street with a small basket of biscuits. "Welcome home, Margaret," he said warmly. "Thank you, Bill," she replied. "You've kept the street alive while I was gone." He chuckled. "Someone had to. Place felt empty without your roses out front." They sat for a while, sharing small talk about gardens and neighbors. At last, his voice softened. "You did what you had to. Don't let guilt fool you into thinking otherwise." She looked down at her tea. "Doing the right thing doesn't always feel right." He nodded. "No, but it's the only thing that lasts." After he left, the quiet returned, but it didn't feel lonely. Margaret walked through the hallway, her steps echoing softly. She stopped by the staircase and smiled faintly, remembering Ethan's first steps there, her husband cheering, her heart overflowing with pride. The past didn't hurt tonight. It simply existed. She spent the next hour cleaning, dusting, opening windows, letting fresh air sweep through the rooms. With each motion, she reclaimed a little more of herself. The sound of rain had faded, replaced by the hum of crickets outside. Then came a knock. Margaret froze, her heart catching. She opened the door carefully. A delivery driver stood on the porch, holding a small cardboard box. "For Mrs. Blake," he said. She signed and thanked him, then carried the box inside. The return address made her breath hitch. E. Blake, Charleston. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside was a simple wooden frame wrapped in brown paper. When she peeled it back, she gasped softly. It was the old family photo. Her husband, and a young Ethan grinning wide between them. Beneath it lay a note in Ethan's familiar handwriting. "I don't deserve to be in this house right now, but this picture does. Thank you for reminding me what home really means." Margaret stared at the words until they blurred. Tears came quietly. No sobs, just warmth slipping down her cheeks. She placed the photo on the mantel, the same spot it had hung for years, and whispered, "Welcome home." The sight steadied her. The house no longer felt empty. It felt alive again. She sat by the window, the moonlight spilling across the floor, and listened to the soft hum of the night. Outside, the cicadas sang. Inside, her heart found stillness. The anger, the fear, even the sorrow had thinned, leaving only gratitude. She had survived the storm of lies, of betrayal, of loss, and somehow emerged stronger. Before bed, she stood by the window overlooking the garden. The soil looked dark and rich under the moonlight. She could almost hear her husband's voice. Plant something new tomorrow. The earth always forgives when you give it care. She smiled. Tomorrow, she whispered. In her room, she slipped under the covers, exhaustion pressing gently on her shoulders. The wind outside rustled the trees, steady and soothing. For the first time in years, she fell asleep not to worry, but to peace. Her last thought before drifting off was simple and sure. Love may bend, but it never breaks. And in that truth, she finally rested. Morning sunlight spilled through the half-open curtains, warm and gold. Margaret blinked awake, the peace of the house wrapping around her like a soft blanket. It had been years since she'd slept so deeply. For a long while, she just listened to the faint hum of cicadas, to the quiet creak of floorboards settling, to the whisper of a home finally at rest. She rose, made coffee, and stepped onto the porch. The garden was still bare, but the soil looked rich, waiting. She knelt, pressed her fingers into the damp earth, and smiled. "You've been patient," she murmured. "So have I." A car slowed on the street. Mr. Porter leaned out the window. "Morning, Margaret? Back to work already?" "Someone has to keep these roses honest," she teased. He laughed. "Glad to see you smiling again. The neighborhood's starting to feel right." When he drove off, she lingered in the sunshine, letting it warm her skin. For months she had lived in shadows, fear, shame, anger, but they had finally burned away. What remained was simple, quiet strength. By noon, she drove into town to meet Clara. The lawyer was already waiting at a small cafe, papers neatly stacked beside her cup. "You look good," Clara said as Margaret sat down. "I feel good," Margaret replied. "Free." Clara smiled. "That's what happens when truth wins." She slid a folder across the table. "These are the final documents. Everything's closed. Case dismissed, accounts settled. You can move forward." Margaret flipped through the pages, her name printed boldly on each line. The sense of closure was tangible, almost heavy. "It's really over," she whispered. "It is," Clara said. "They dropped their defense last night. Too much evidence against them. Where are they now?" "Charleston, probably," Clara replied. "Rumor says Lila's family sold their business to cover legal fees. Karma has a timetable after all." Margaret stirred her tea slowly. "I don't want revenge, Clara. I just want peace." "You've earned it," Clara said, "and you didn't even have to raise your voice." They talked for another hour about simple things, gardens, recipes, books. When they parted, Clara hugged her. "You're stronger than most women I've ever met." "I just got tired of being afraid," Margaret said. Driving home, she passed familiar streets, the grocery where she used to shop with Ethan, the bakery that still smelled of cinnamon. Each one carried a ghost, but not the kind that haunted, just reminders of the life she'd reclaimed. At home, she unpacked groceries and found herself humming an old tune her husband used to whistle while fixing the porch. For the first time, the memory didn't hurt. It simply lived inside her, gentle and whole. Later that afternoon, a knock sounded at the door. Margaret hesitated, wiping her hands on a towel, then opened it. Ethan stood there holding a small paper bag. He looked older, quieter, but not broken. "Mom," he said softly. "Ethan, I brought you something." He handed her the bag. Inside was a loaf of warm bread from the bakery they both loved. "Thought you might like it." She studied him for a moment. "You didn't have to." "I know," he said. "That's why I wanted to." They sat at the kitchen table. For a while, neither spoke. The clock ticked softly between them. Finally, Ethan said, "I heard Lila's gone back to her parents. She won't be bothering you anymore." Margaret nodded. "And you?" "I'm working at a dockyard," he said. "It's not glamorous, but it's honest." "Honest is enough," she said gently. He smiled faintly. "I'm trying, Mom." "I know," she replied. "That's all I ever wanted." He hesitated. "Do you think you can forgive me?" She looked at him carefully. "Forgiveness isn't a door you open once. It's a road you walk. We're on it now." Tears glimmered in his eyes. "Thank you." When he left, she stood at the window, watching him drive away. Her chest ached, but it was no longer the ache of loss. It was the ache of healing. As dusk fell, she sat in the garden again, the sky painted in shades of rose and gold. She placed her hands on the soil, feeling its warmth, and whispered, "Tomorrow, I'll plant again." The wind moved gently through the yard, carrying the scent of rain and promise. Margaret closed her eyes, breathing it in. The past was finally quiet. The future was hers to grow. The next morning dawned bright and still, sunlight pooling across the floorboards of the Blake house. Margaret woke early, feeling lighter than she had in years. The pain that had once clung to her heart like ivy had loosened its hold. The house no longer felt haunted. It felt alive again, waiting for something new. She dressed simply, pulled her hair back, and stepped into the garden. The air smelled faintly of salt from the nearby river. Kneeling in the soil, she pressed her hands into the earth and smiled. "You've waited long enough," she whispered. "Let's start over." By mid-morning, she was planting roses, the same kind she'd grown before Ethan's betrayal, red for courage, white for peace, yellow for forgiveness. Each stem went into the ground with steady hands. Across the street, Mr. Porter leaned on his fence, watching. "Didn't waste any time, did you?" he called. She smiled. "Flowers don't plant themselves, Bill." He grinned. "You always did make this street prettier. Glad to see you back where you belong." As she worked, her thoughts wandered to Ethan. He hadn't called again since their brief visit, but that was all right. He was rebuilding his own life, just as she was rebuilding hers. She didn't need daily calls to know he still loved her. Real love didn't vanish. It waited quietly. Later that day, Clara stopped by, bringing lunch and laughter. "I knew you'd be in the dirt again," she teased, handing Margaret a sandwich. "I swear you and those roses have the same stubborn streak." "They're easier to manage than people," Margaret joked. They ate on the porch, sunlight flickering through the oak trees. For the first time in a long while, Margaret allowed herself to talk freely about her plans, her hopes, even her fears. "I'm thinking of turning the guest room into a reading space," she said. "Something peaceful." Clara nodded. "You deserve peaceful." Margaret glanced toward the garden. Peace doesn't come from winning. It comes from letting go. Clara smiled softly. "You always did have a poet's heart." When Clara left, Margaret stayed on the porch, sipping tea as evening light settled over the neighborhood. The quiet no longer felt empty. It was full of memories, of meaning, of the simple rhythm of life returning. As twilight deepened, her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Ethan. "I saw a help wanted sign at a bakery. I applied. Thought you'd like that." Margaret smiled. "Your father would be proud," she texted back. "You think so?" he replied. "I know so," she wrote. There was a long pause before another message appeared. "I'm still trying to forgive myself." She typed slowly. "Then keep trying. Forgiveness isn't a gift. It's practice." When he didn't respond again, she didn't worry. Healing wasn't measured in words. It was measured in small, honest steps. Later, as night fell, Margaret walked through the house, lighting a few candles. The flicker of flame reflected on the photo of her family, restored to its place on the mantel. She paused in front of it, her fingers brushing the frame. "Look at us," she whispered. "We made it." A faint wind drifted through the open window, stirring the curtains. She took it as an answer. Before heading to bed, she stood once more at the doorway, gazing out at the garden under moonlight. The newly planted roses glistened with dew, each bloom like a promise. The house, once a symbol of betrayal, now breathed renewal. In the distance, church bells rang faintly, marking the late hour. She smiled, feeling the quiet rhythm of life settling into place again. She thought of everything the past months had taken from her: trust, peace, certainty, and realized they had given her something far greater: clarity. She no longer feared being alone, because solitude had turned into strength. She whispered softly into the night, "You can lose everything and still come home to yourself." The house creaked in reply, as if agreeing. Margaret turned off the last lamp and walked upstairs, the soft glow of moonlight following her. Before slipping into bed, she took one last look at the photograph. Her husband's smile seemed to shimmer faintly in the candlelight, and for the first time, she felt no sadness, only gratitude. "Good night," she said quietly. "We're all right now." Outside, the garden swayed gently in the breeze, carrying her words into the dark. The roses, new and fragile, leaned toward the moon, their petals unfolding, proof that even after the harshest storm, beauty always finds its way back. The following week brought a kind of calm Margaret hadn't known in years. Mornings began with the soft hiss of the kettle and the scent of brewing coffee, followed by quiet moments in the garden as sunlight filtered through the oaks. Every day felt ordinary, and that was the miracle. Peace no longer frightened her. On Thursday, a letter arrived from Charleston. She recognized Ethan's handwriting instantly. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it, half afraid of what it might say. "Mom," the letter began, "I got the bakery job. It's small, but I like it. The owner said I have a good eye for detail, like Dad. I'm trying to stay steady. Some nights I still wake up hearing your voice from that night, the way you said, 'Go to hell.' I deserved it, but I want you to know I'm not that man anymore. I don't expect you to forget, but I hope you believe I'm changing." Margaret exhaled slowly. Beneath the words, she could hear him, not the arrogant man who had thrown her out, but the boy who used to help her bake on Sunday mornings. She folded the letter carefully and placed it beside the family photo on the mantel. That afternoon, she met Clara for lunch at the Riverside Cafe. "You look lighter," Clara said, stirring her iced tea. "I got a letter from Ethan," Margaret replied. "He's working at a bakery." Clara's smile softened. "Maybe this really is the turning point." "I think it is," Margaret said. "He's learning what it means to start over." "So am I." They talked about simple things, gardens, recipes, neighbors, until Margaret noticed a young couple nearby arguing softly about finances. The woman looked exhausted, the man defensive. Margaret's chest tightened with recognition. How many times had she sat in that same silence years ago, trying to hold a family together while feeling invisible? When Clara left, Margaret walked along the riverbank. The sun shimmered across the water, and she thought of how life could still surprise her. Maybe she couldn't undo the past, but she could plant better seeds for what came next. That evening, she returned home and found a small envelope tucked under her door. There was no return address, just her name written neatly in ink. Inside was a check from an anonymous donor, the amount modest but generous. A note read, "For the community garden you dreamed of. Thank you for reminding us what resilience looks like." Her throat tightened. She hadn't told anyone about that idea, only mentioned it once to Ethan years ago, back when he was still kind. She smiled faintly. Maybe this was his way of giving something back. The next morning, she drove to the local nursery. The clerk, a cheerful woman with soil-stained gloves, helped her load the truck with saplings, herbs, and packets of seeds. "You starting a new garden?" she asked. "Something like that," Margaret said. Back at home, she worked all day in the small field behind the house, clearing weeds and turning soil. The sun beat down, but she didn't mind. Sweat and dirt had always felt honest, proof of effort, of care. By evening, she had planted rows of vegetables, wildflowers, and a circle of lavender where she planned to build a bench. The scent filled the air as twilight settled. Margaret stood in the middle of her new garden, hands on her hips, and whispered, "We're growing again." That night, she received another message from Ethan. "I heard you're planting again. Guess the rumor mill in Savannah still works. I'm proud of you, Mom." She replied simply, "I'm proud of you too. Keep going." There was no reply, but she didn't need one. Some connections no longer needed constant tending. They grew quietly like roots beneath the soil. Days passed peacefully. The neighbors began stopping by, curious about her project. Mr. Porter brought extra tools, and the widow from 2 houses down offered seedlings. By the weekend, the backyard was full of laughter and work. The garden wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to everyone. As she watched children dig in the dirt and older hands plant new life, Margaret realized something she hadn't before. Forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. It was about creating space for something better to grow. When evening came, the last of the volunteers left, and the air smelled of freshly turned soil and hope. Margaret sat on the bench surrounded by lavender, listening to the soft hum of crickets. The garden shimmered in the fading light, each bloom reflecting a piece of her journey. She smiled to herself, whispering, "This is what healing looks like." And under the vast Savannah sky, the earth seemed to agree. The next Sunday arrived warm and golden, the kind of morning that made Savannah shimmer. Margaret stood on her porch, watching the neighborhood come alive, the sound of children laughing, the soft chatter of neighbors heading to church. The garden behind her house swayed gently in the breeze, every flower open, every color vibrant. Life had begun again. She wore a simple blue dress and a small silver locket around her neck, the one her husband had given her on their 20th anniversary. Inside, it was a tiny photo of Ethan as a child, grinning with a missing front tooth. She smiled softly at it before tucking it beneath her blouse. By mid-morning, volunteers began to gather in the garden. Mr. Porter brought lemonade, the local baker dropped off loaves of bread, and even a few teenagers came by to help water the plants. What had started as her private act of healing had become a small community ritual. Margaret moved between rows, helping, laughing, listening. When the widow from down the street handed her a bouquet of fresh-cut roses, she said, "You brought life back to this block, Margaret. I hope you know that." Margaret's eyes warmed. "No," she said softly. "The block just remembered how to breathe." They spent hours in the sunshine, tending to the soil, planting new seeds and sharing stories. The sound of shovels and laughter carried down the street, a rhythm of renewal. As the afternoon wore on, a familiar car slowed near the curb. Margaret froze for half a heartbeat before recognizing it. Ethan stepped out, dressed neatly in jeans and a button-up shirt, a bouquet of wildflowers in his hand. The crowd quieted as he approached. "Mom," he said, his voice steady but tender. "Ethan," she replied, her tone soft but firm. He looked around, taking in the sight of the garden, the neighbors, the laughter. "It's beautiful," he said. "You did this." "We did this," she corrected. "Everyone helped." He smiled faintly. "It suits you. You've always had a gift for growing things." She nodded toward the flowers in his hand. "Those for me?" He chuckled nervously. "I didn't know what to bring, so I just picked what looked honest." She took them gently. Honest is the right choice. They stood for a moment, the noise of the garden filling the silence between them. Finally, Ethan spoke. I've been going to counseling, he said quietly, trying to figure out why I became someone who could hurt the person who loved me most. Margaret studied him carefully. His eyes were clearer now, older, steadier. "And?" she asked. "I'm still learning," he said, "but I want to be someone you can be proud of again." "I already am," she said, "not because you're perfect, but because you're trying." Emotion flickered across his face. He looked at the crowd of neighbors working behind her. "Seems like you're doing fine without me." She smiled. "Maybe, but that doesn't mean there isn't room for you." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I'd like to help if you'll let me." "Then start by planting something," she said, handing him a small pot of soil and a sprig of rosemary. "It's good for cleansing the air." He knelt in the dirt beside her, hands trembling slightly. Together they planted the herb, pressing the soil firm. When he looked up, tears glistened in his eyes. "This feels like a beginning," he whispered. "It is," she said. "Every seed is." The neighbors clapped softly, not intruding, just sharing the moment. Mr. Porter wiped his eyes behind his sunglasses. "Well, I'll be," he muttered. "Didn't think I'd see the day." Margaret laughed lightly. "Life's full of surprises, Bill." When the sun began to sink, the crowd slowly dispersed. Ethan stayed behind, helping stack the empty pots and gather tools. As the last light fell across the garden, he turned to her. "I'll come by next Sunday. Maybe I can build that bench you always wanted." "I'd like that," she said. They hugged then, tentative, fragile, but real. When he pulled back, she saw her husband's kindness reflected in his eyes. After he left, Margaret sat on the porch, the garden glowing under the fading light. The air smelled of lavender, rosemary, and renewal. She watched the sky turn from gold to rose to blue and whispered, "We made it." For a long while she sat there, listening to the evening hum of cicadas and distant laughter. Her story had begun in pain, but it ended in peace. And as the stars began to appear above the quiet street, she smiled, because healing, she knew now, wasn't a single act. It was a garden that grew each day, watered by forgiveness, sunlight, and time. She looked at the camera she'd set up on the porch rail and pressed record. "If you've been through a storm," she said softly, "don't give up before the morning. The sun always returns." She paused, her smile calm and certain. "Tell me in the comments what part of your life is blooming again. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories of second chances.